Jeff Epstein, notorious, infamous for raping children, conspiracy, witness tampering, prostitution, blackmail, extortion, you name it. His new charges, he's already been convicted of soliciting prostitutes. That was minor. He was raping minors, but he got a sweetheart deal. Largely in part because of other players who will be in this map later. He's accused of perpetual rape, often using his sex slaves as collateral and to gain leverage over his friends, business partners, politicians, etc. Which he uses for extortion. The witness tampering, two of his co-conspirators at least were paid $350 million to be quiet. But how did he get his start? Now, he's got a couple cohorts we know of so far. Jean-Luc Brunel and Jocelyn Maxwell. Jean-Luc ran a modeling agency, MC Squared Modeling, which has offices in New York City, Miami, and Tel Aviv, Israel. Imagine my lack of surprise. He used this to get girls as young as 12. Apparently, according to witness testimony, they would bring them to the Caribbean resort and engage in orgies with underage children. Epstein, of course, had properties in the Caribbean, Little St. John being the most infamous, Paris, New Mexico, Palm Beach, Florida, and New York City, New York. His New York property, which was estimated at $77 million, $55 to $77 million, was basically given to him, granted for $0 by Leslie Wexner. And oddly, the bill of sale, the seller and the buyer hold the signature of Jeff Epstein. So it's not even really a legal sale, but it's a way of Wexner distancing himself. Now, he has financed Jeff Epstein and also gave him a house, not just a house, a mansion, where a lot of this rapey rape was conducted. Now, Wexner, of course, is part of this group called the Mega Group, which is a clique of Jewish billionaires. On that also you'll see men like Charles Bronfman, Michael Steinhardt, Spielberg, also Edgar Bronfman. And the purpose of this clique, the only thing they had in common other than being wealthy was being Jewish. And it was to influence policy on behalf of Israeli interests. Even though a lot of these people are Americans, it was for Israeli interests. Michael Steinhardt, by the way, has also been accused of sexual harassment by 7 different women. He looks like a winner, doesn't he? You'll notice every time there's a pink bubble here that has something to do with, that's the most mild one. Sexual harassment, sexual blackmail, all the way on up to raping children. Also on this is Charles and Edgar Bronfman. Charles Bronfman was the chairman of the United Jewish Communities, which incorporated United Jewish Appeal, Council of Jewish Federations, and United Israel Appeal. And you should read the book by Grant F. Smith, Big Israel, if you want to know all about United Israel Appeal. Well, all of these, but especially this group and their nefarious activities. And then Edgar Bronfman, this is senior by the way, was the president of the World Jewish Congress. And they run Seagram's Liquor. That's important. Edgar's daughters, Sarah and Claire Bronfman, were caught up in the NXIVM cult. And Claire, at least, has pleaded guilty in the sex cult case, leaving leaders to stand trial alone. Yeah, so we'll get into Nexium, but Nexium was essentially a self-help guru cult with Keith Raniere, where they were roping people in almost like a religion and taking pictures of underage girls and having sex with underage girls, and it was a cult of sex slavery, child pornography, all that good stuff. And this has already come down with some convictions: sex trafficking and pedophilia. Bronfman has pleaded guilty for her role in this as a procurer and a participant. At least the younger one, Claire Bronfman. So, in the indication, you've got a sex trafficking pedophile cult. You've got a man engaged in multiple acts of sexual harassment. They're all tied up in these different Jewish groups, which also move around refugees, by the way. And you'll see why that matters later. And one of them decides to almost completely on his own finance Jeff Epstein and give him a house. Now, Leslie Wexner created the Wexner Foundation and put Jeff Epstein on the board. Also, Reporty, or Carbine as it's now called, was something that Epstein invested in on behalf of Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, from 1999 to 2001. And you can see now that this is from the Miami Herald here. In 2015, Barak formed a limited partnership company in Israel to invest in a high-tech startup called Reporty, now named Carbine, which develops video streaming and geolocation software for emergency services. Yeah, I'm sure that's what it's for. The Times reported, a large part of the investment money was supplied by Epstein. Barak also received $2.5 million from Wexner Foundation in 2004 for research, which has never been fully explained. Haaretz reported Epstein was a member of that foundation. Speaking of Israeli TV, Meet the Press Saturday, Barak stated he had no intention or no idea that Epstein's charges related to molesting underage girls, and defended his business relationship with Epstein. BS. As we'll see, Barak will show up not only in New York. Here he is outside of Epstein's rape mansion in New York, but also in the Caribbean. Israel's former prime minister says he visited the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's private Caribbean island, but never partied with him or met any young girls. Yeah, I'm sure you walked around the island, which consisted of nothing but an alleged music room and a rape mansion. But you just went to the Caribbean to talk to him. You couldn't call him. Just did that, right? Now, on his watch, Ehud Barak had the Israeli foreign minister in Brazil, Ari Sher, who met with the Hebrew language teacher George Steinberg, who were both involved in pedophilia and sex trafficking. The case busted wide open when George Steinberg posted a picture of a naked 17-year-old on the internet that he swore he wasn't going to share, and she actually saw it. So how many photos of naked girls was he putting on the web for one of them to just happen to come across their own picture? Anyway, they found just caches of child pornography, and in the background of the pictures was the Israeli consulate's pool and backdrop showing that it had taken place on government property. Basically what they were doing is they were renting out parties to Israeli tourists for child molestation and rape, and we're talking like 8 and 9-year-olds too, not just like 15 And they're all bad, but there is definitely it gets worse as you go down. And guess what happened? Sure, just flees to Israel. Okay. And Ehud Barak does nothing. He actually tried to pass him off to Australia later. Tried to just move him around, Catholic Church style. The president in 2000 was Moshe Katsav, president of Israel, who got convicted of rape. Raped 4 different women. They were Jewish girls, so they counted, and he was convicted of rape. That's what happens when you rape someone other than the goy, someone that matters. The president of Israel was convicted of rape. The government employees are running little kid child trafficking sex slavery rings and having orgies and parties. They get busted, their prime minister just helps them with the crimes. Of course, he's going to abet the crimes. He's engaging in those kind of crimes himself. And this is why this is coming out now. Netanyahu, who is just as much a piece of trash as Barak, tied with the Blue and White Party last election, and now he has another election in September to become prime minister, remain prime minister, and he's running against a former prime minister, Ehud Barak. And so he'll be posting these pictures on Twitter himself. And this is why now? Because when another powerful Israeli is involved, that's the only time you'll see a lesser powerful Israeli getting burned. Now, of course, Katsav and Ehud Barak, being the president and prime minister of Israel, obviously linked to the Mossad, as does Ghislaine Maxwell, who's herself accused of rape and pedophilia. Her father was an Israeli spy. Gordon Thomas has a book about it. And also related to the Mossad because he stole Promise software, which is what the Israelis based their Pegasus software on, which, by the way, spies on phones. So Anthony Weiner and Huma Abedin and anyone else, if they want to look at your phone and your sexting messages, they can do that. But it also tracked Jamal Khashoggi, who was murdered. And the software company was called NSO. But put a pin in that. Let's come back here first. This organization, Black Cube of former Mossad agents, is something that Ehud Barak personally introduced Harvey Weinstein to. Why? He had the Mossad, former Mossad agents harassing the rape victims of Harvey Weinstein. Of course, Harvey Weinstein himself was engaged in rape, leveraged rape, the kind of casting couch rape, do it or your career in Hollywood is over kind of rape. So he's linked to Hollywood, which would be linked to a lot. So coming back to NSO, Jamal Khashoggi, I have a line to the Saudi government because both he and his uncle worked in some capacity with the Saudi state. And Jeff Epstein had an Austrian passport with a fake name and a Saudi Arabian address in his safe in New York. Is that a relation to the Saudi gov? We'll put a dotted line and question mark because we don't know. But we do know somebody faked an Austrian passport. And why did they give him a Saudi address? Their official excuse for this was, oh, we were just hiding his Jewish identity so he could travel through the Middle East safely. Except to use the passport to go to places like France and Spain and just about anywhere other than the Middle East. But okay. And as if sticking a Jewish guy with a fake name in Saudi Arabia is the safest place. Adnan Khashoggi was famous for his prostitutes and hooker crews. Now, not actually rape convictions or accusations, but well known as the biggest whoremonger the planet has ever seen. They go out in their yachts filled with Eastern European prostitutes, and they would do the most despicable things, pooping on people's faces and just all the most debaucherous stuff you can imagine. And he actually met with Richard Pearl from the Defense Department, who's a known spy for Israel himself. I mean, I could draw another line there. Oh, there you go. It's right there. He was a known spy. Let's see if well, okay. We'll just continue down this thread and loop around again now. Of course, he linked to Louis Libby, who is one of the neocons with Pearl, but Pearl was in the DOD as chairman. Libby was in the office of the vice president. He was Dick Cheney's chief of staff. He's also a lawyer for Mark Rich. Now, Louis Libby wrote a book about underage Japanese girls getting raped by a bear. So he had pedophilia, rape, and bestiality in his sole novel he ever wrote. And he was defended by another Jewish billionaire, Mel Simbler. He raised the Louis Libby Defense Fund. That was in lieu of the Plame affair. And, of course, Mel Simbler is the one who used his position in Italy to stovepipe the bogus intel about Niger forgeries directly to Washington, which circumvented the natural channels for that. And, of course, that was given to him by Ghorbanifar and Michael Ledeen. Ledeen is part of this Schmitz-Bush family cartel, and I've already done a chalkboard video on that about Joseph P. Schmitz, Mary Kay Letourneau, who Mary Kay was raping a 13-year-old boy.
That got pregnant after raping her 13-year-old student. Yeah, child rape. She's the sister of Joseph E. Schmitz, who was a conservative lawyer and former Inspector General of the Department of Defense, and he's now an executive with Blackwater, who he refused to investigate and helped cover up a massive scandal there involving Boeing and all these guys. I'll explain that later. Their brother is John P. Schmitz. He was the former White House counsel until he was replaced by Fred Felding, who is George Bush's personal lawyer and now a lawyer for Blackwater. Fred Felding is actually countersuing the families of the 4 Blackwater employees who were found strung up on a bridge in Fallujah. The families wanted to know the circumstances surrounding that event, and Blackwater didn't like that too much, and so they're actually countersuing the families with Fred Felding and 5 other firms. This asshole was also on the 9/11 Commission. Yeah, no bias there. Bush's lawyer on the 9/11 Commission. John P. Schmitz was also involved with Iran-Contra back when he was an aide for Bush the First, Bush Sr., and he refused to testify to the Waltz Commission. Of course, Iran-Contra also involved Mark Rich, who I'm going to talk about later, and Lee Hamilton, who was also on the 9/11 Commission. He gave a room full of criminals immunity during Iran-Contra. Then George Bush Sr. pardoned another 6, and then Clinton pardoned some more, including Mr. Mark Roach, who we'll get to in a bit. So we have a rapist, 2 actually, a baby rapist and a child rapist, an inspector general who is the executive of a secretive mercenary group, and the former White House counsel who was replaced by a Blackwater lawyer who just so happened to also be on the 9/11 Commission and is George Bush's personal lawyer as well. Schmitz's father, John G. Schmitz, was a senator and congressman from California. Pretty famous for his right-wing stances, occasional racist and homophobic remarks. His public career was ended when it was revealed they had an affair and fathered 2 illegitimate children. He got in trouble after his 13-month-old son of his mistress was found with hair wrapped around his penis. I think that explains why his other legitimate children are so messed up. Just to get in the guy's head, he bought a house of his hero, Joseph McCarthy, who I'll call a modern version of a witch trial-like fear mentality of the insanely religious psychopath. Schmitz's wife's sister is Columba Bush, who's married to Jeb Bush, George Bush Jr.'s brother, one of his brothers. So John P. Schmidt and Jeb Bush are brother-in-laws. Schmidt also worked for the neocon James Buckley, as did his brother, former Inspector General, and cover-up for Blackwater, who's now an executive for them. Jeb Bush, of course, is known to fly around on planes with drug dealers, and his brother Neil, of course, was caught with hookers and had investments, aka payoff, in the Ignite software from Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky. Wonderful. His other brother Marvin, who was the head of security for the World Trade Centers until September 10th, 2001, had a pretty strange suicide of his babysitter who was run over by her own car. So another one of those many unsolved murders. And then of course there's GW's been caught with cocaine and has gotten DUIs, etc. He's a drug addict as well. When Neil Bush got caught in Southeast Asia with hookers, he said they just showed up at his door and wanted to have sex, but they didn't ask for money. Someone else paid the hookers for him in exchange for his financial dealings. GW comes from an extremely messed up family. You can tell his brain's been eaten up by cocaine. Just listen to him say any of his speeches. He's pure addict. Anyway, okay, so these children, Jeb and Marvin and Neil, they come from George Bush Sr., of course, former director of the CIA, the largest terrorist organization in the world. These yellow boxes just mean a lot. I can't even start writing the flow chart for Boris Berezovsky or the CIA because there's too many things that oligarchs in the CIA are involved in. George Bush Sr., now a spokesman for the private equity firm the Carlyle Group, was at a meeting with Osama bin Laden's brother on the morning of September 11th. Ironically, his son Neil was set to have dinner with Scott Hinckley, the brother of John Hinckley, who almost made George Bush Sr. president. Came inches away from that. George Bush's brother, Prescott Jr., was involved with the Inagawa Kai. It's the third largest Yakuza group in Japan. I'll explain that later. And that, again, they're involved with too much stuff. Really evil bastards. And then their father, Prescott Sr., of course, was the principal financier for the Nazis. So you have the largest, nastiest criminal group from Germany, Japan, the United States, and Russia. And they're all involved with Bushes of different generations. Amazing family. Of course, W, not to be outdone by Clinton, whose spiritual advisor was giving him advice on adultery while standing next to his pregnant mistress. George Bush's spiritual advisor was Ted Haggard, who got caught with a male hooker as well as doing crank. It's just a plethora of sexual scandals and drugs. Of course, Bush's vice president, Dick Cheney, was on the DC Madame list. She had a very bizarre suicide. Also on that list was Vitter and several other people in government. Cheney's chief of staff, Louis Libby, PNAC Arthur with him, was on the White House Iraq group with Rove. He was a plane leaker. Leaked on Valerie Plame, so did Rove. He wrote a book about underage Japanese girls getting raped by animals. Rove, of course, had a male hooker in the White House, Jeff Gannon. And Jeff Gannon made references to internal government memos about the Plame affair before it was public. So why did this male hooker have such access to the highest levels of the White House? We're just starting to learn a little bit about Karl Rove's closet. So he actually was a male hooker and part of a fake news organization. All this blue is sex scandals and drugs on the map. The yellow are businesses and the white is people. Libby, of course, was a lawyer for the Mossad agent Mark Rich, who also has ties to the oligarchs. Mark Rich, of course, is in bed with the Clintons. Bill Clinton gave him a pardon on his last day in office. Rich, of course, was involved in the Iran-Contra affair as well with Lee Hamilton, who was on the 9/11 Commission, as was fellow PNAC member John Lehman on the 9/11 Commission, part of PNAC, as was Libby and Cheney. 9/11 Commission also had James Thompson III, who was on the board of directors of Hollinger with Kissinger and Pearl. Of course, of Trireme Boeing. I'm going to go over this scandal now. Now here's what went down. Now Schmitz had already covered for Richard Pearl for his Global Crossing scam, which I don't have time to get into, but the big one was in May 2003, and this involved Boeing and Trireme, Richard Pearl, and all the usual suspects. Okay, so Boeing invests $20 million in Richard Pearl and Henry Kissinger's private equity firm Trireme. Then they suddenly get a contract for 100 tanker planes worth $30 billion. Totally unnecessary, didn't need these planes, by the way. Pearl writes an editorial in the Wall Street Journal promoting what's essentially his own deal with Boeing. And then the weapons buyer for the Pentagon, Pete Aldrich Jr., approves of the deal on his last day in office. Senator John Warner of Virginia, he was the head of the Armed Services Committee, called it the most significant defense procurement mismanagement in contemporary history. A couple of low-level schmucks ended up in jail. The Secretary of the Air Force resigned, and ultimately it was up to Joseph Smith to investigate. So Smith comes out with a report censoring all connections to any White House officials, and he even submitted it to the White House for review before he released it. It's like giving the criminals the paper and saying, will this be okay? Is this good enough? I made sure none of you get in trouble. Schmidt also refused to investigate a case about human trafficking when KBR, that's Kellogg Brown and Root of Halliburton, had 35,000 third world nationals working for them in horrible conditions. This is a company that's since been caught in alleged rape of its own employees, drugging female employees who were in Iraq and gang raping them. What a bunch.
There's a lot of rape and hookers and abusing babies even. So that is a different chalkboard video. You can go check it out later. Let's move back up to Rich. Of course, Mark Rich was pardoned by Bill Clinton, as was his partner and mentor Pincus Green. And Denise Rich, I could add her name here too, but she financed Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign in New York. Now Bill Clinton is of course guilty of adultery, and he's been accused of rape, and he was a participant on the Lolita Express, and that's not a nickname, that's the actual name of Epstein's plane. Now Mark Rich and Glencore are guilty of a lot of things, but just sticking with the rape theme, he set up this company Benex in New York City and its counterpart Norex, which was in Russia, to launder money back and forth and hide and assist and abet Gregory Lalchansky, who's an Israeli citizen, by the way. He's known as the mob boss, especially after Berezovsky died. Boris Berezovsky, by the way, also buddies with Mark Rich and Rupert Murdoch. But it's just too big of a story there. But and that would include money laundering, narcotics trafficking, weapons trafficking, uranium and polonium, and of course human trafficking. And Pincus Green and Mark Rich were very well aware of that, and the little kids that were being sold. Not one of his crimes that, they always go after his tax evasion stunts. He's buddies, or was buddies, with Dershowitz too. Mark Rich is now deceased, but you can look this up through Bendex and Norex and the Russian mob and their connection to Mark Rich. He also helped illegally smuggle arms into South Africa, traded with Iran during the embargo, completely screwed over the country of Zambia with their copper mining through various means. I have a film about it called Neocolonialism in Africa if you want to check it out. Now Hillary, my mom's cousin, is witnessed sleeping with women, and she's also been accused of being there with Bill on Rape Island. Alright. Let's zip back to Epstein. Now, we know that Wexner gave him money and a house. Another source of revenue, when he back in the day, he worked as a math teacher at Dalton High School. Now this is a pretty prestigious high school. Yet Epstein's a two-time college dropout, has no degree, but he's going to go teach math and physics at a prestigious high school. And he was hired by Donald Barr, who's the father of William Barr from the Trump administration. Well, he doesn't know that yet when he hires him, but it's suspicious because he's the headmaster of this school. The next head, and he's kind of driven out by a particular clique of parents. And he's replaced by this Gardner P. Dunnan, who had a 14-year-old girl and student live at his house, where he cheated on his wife who was dying of cancer with another teacher. That was his adultery, and he also sexually abused a 14-year-old kid. And that is who Epstein works under. Now, while at school, he made friends with Lynn and Ted Greenberg, who were the daughter and son of Ace, or Alex C. Greenberg, Ace Greenberg of Bear Stearns. So this is where Epstein will work briefly, although he'll leave abruptly, but his employers will back him up. Now, Bear Stearns, when he leaves Bear Stearns, while at Bear Stearns, he loans money to this Giuseppe B. Tomei, and then turns around and tells on him because Tomei was engaged in insider trading on behalf of Seagram's, which goes back to Edgar Bronfman. Well, both Bronfman, because they're Seagram, but Edgar Bronfman specifically, he and Epstein tell on this Tomei guy. They're doing this tender offer to take over St. Joe's Mineral Corporation. They make, or they used to make, the majority of zinc and lead for the United States. And on March 10th, the takeover is on the 11th. On the 10th, and then again on the exact day, the 11th, there are these bids made. And through 3 companies in Panama: Transatlantic Financial Company SA, the Nayrit Investments SA, and Finvest Panama. But Epstein essentially stabs Tomei in the back after loaning him money, and then tells on him to the SEC for engaging in insider trading. They bid up the price. They took 1,055 stock options and 3,000 shares all the day before the offer. So essentially, Epstein and Bronfman set him up. So he goes to jail, and Epstein walks away scot-free, of course. And then he goes and partners up with this guy, Stephen Hoffenberg, who got jailed for, at the time, the largest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history, stealing people's money that they're supposed to be investing. And he has claimed that Epstein was his partner, and yet Epstein doesn't receive any punishments. I wonder why. It's almost like he's got people compromised with something. Which he did. And now, looking south, Epstein's infamous lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. But I kept my underwear on. I couldn't have raped those girls on Rape Island where I'm getting a mysterious massage upstairs in my underwear from 15-year-olds. I kept my underwear on. Alan Dershowitz was quoted in Penthouse magazine making the case for pedophilia, where he said, "Kiddie porn doesn't make one a bad person and therefore should not be a punishable offense." Really? How about the child that's in the kiddie porn? Are they not hurt by it? You know, this guy is so narcissistic. He can't even put himself in the shoes of like, yeah, what about the kids that are in the porn? Now, everything is about me for this guy. So he's thinking, well, if I watch it or I look at that and get off on that, it doesn't make me bad. It doesn't hurt anyone. I'm not a bad person just because of that. Oh, no, you kind of are, because you're engaging in a market activity that traffics kids. And it's definitely damaging to the child to be involved in porn. You weird creep. He's been accused of rape. He's been to Rape Island, and he's admitted he got a massage at Epstein Properties, but of course he kept his underwear on. Now, Dershowitz is the bastard that defended Roman Polanski, who raped a 13-year-old and got convicted. He also defended another rapist, Baruch Leibovitz, who was a homosexual that admitted to having oral sex 8 times with teenage boys. and raping teenage boys. Dershowitz got him out on a technicality 2 years after. I mean, he's known to rape kids. He admitted that he did it in 2010. But in 2012, Dershowitz gets him out on a technicality, and this guy becomes free to the world to rape again. And then also Dershowitz was a lawyer for Jonathan Pollard, a spy for Israel. I keep bringing that up because, defends a spy for Israel and a bunch of pedophile rapists. Roger Maxwell, a spy for Israel, and his daughter is a pedophile rapist. Ehud Barat, financed by Wexner and Epstein. Seems like he's a rapist too. He's visiting the islands and he defends Ari Shar and Steinberg, both rapists. His president's also a rapist. And of course, he introduces Black Cube to Harvey Weinstein, another rapist. Then Richard Pearl, a spy for Israel. Mark Rich, a spy for Israel. Pincus Green, same thing. Louis Libby, hardcore Zionist. If he wasn't spying, he certainly did everything he could as an architect of the Iraq War. As you can see, that goes straight to the Nazir forgeries. He also ousted Brewster Jennings and Associates, which was a wing of the CIA that was tracking nuclear weapons proliferation, and it was dismantled, and all of its agents, which Valerie Plame was one of, had their cover blown, and that allowed somebody to lie about Iran's nuclear capacity. By the way, Israel has nuclear weapons that they stole from the United States, both material and technical know-how. Alan Dershowitz is working as a consultant for Jared Kushner for the Palestine-Israel deal. Jared Kushner, of course, is the son-in-law of Donald Trump and the son of Charles Kushner, who himself was engaged in sexual blackmail of his own brother-in-law, as well as the governor of New Jersey. He was trying to award himself a position as chairman of the Port Authority, which is appointed by the New Jersey governor. He introduced Governor McGreevey to Golan Sepel in Israel, and Golan leaves Israel and comes back to New Jersey with McGreevey, who was committing adultery with Sepel in his wife's bed while his wife was sick. You see a pattern here? That's very reminiscent of Gardner P. Dunnan. So when your wife's sick, you cheat on him with men. And he was also a closet homosexual. The whole thing got brushed under the rug. When Kevin Spacey was busted fraternizing with minors, he basically said, well, I'm a gay man, and that, oh, how brave, you're so brave, you're gay, and you're coming out of the closet, and all was forgiven. Same thing, it was the McGreevey defense, that's what they called it. So, and Charles Kushner did go to jail. He is a convicted felon. Golan Sepel and his role with McGreevey is not what sent him there. It was blackmailing a fellow tribe man, his brother-in-law, and trying to blackmail his sister in an ordeal where his sister and his brother, Murray, were mad because he didn't cut them in on his illegal campaign financing that he was doing for McGreevey and several others. He made these cutout businesses and he didn't share the loot. Then he tried to blackmail his whole family. He said he went to two police officers, actually. They're both brothers. They're named O'Toole, as the procurers of the hookers. Spent $30,000. Hooker took his brother-in-law, or the brother-in-law took the hooker, I should say, to the ever so classy 2-star motel, the Red Bull Inn, where they filmed the altercation, but his sister didn't care. She sent him to prison anyway. And while there, he recruited a couple more white-collar criminals. Now, from Trump, of course, you have Alexander Acosta, who a few days ago was still the labor secretary, and he, along with the assistant district attorney in New York City, Jennifer Gaffney, both argued for leniency for Jeff Epstein. Jennifer had him demoted from a level 3 sex offender to a level 1 sex offender. He was and she was given concrete evidence that this guy is raping kids. Didn't matter. And you have Graydon Carter of Vanity Fair, who also argued for leniency when Vicky Ward had the story of Epstein years ago. Could have had the story about this monster out. Now, other people did report it in Electronic Intifada, myself at Anti-Neocons and Rise 2 Cents. A lot of people were on this, but Vanity Fair is a much larger publication, and Vicky Ward just wasn't allowed to say what she knew. Graydon Carter said, "Why believe him? And I'm Canadian." I don't know what that means, other than, or you're just saying like, oh, you're not Jewish, like all the rest of this map is pretty much, except for the Clintons. And then you've got the Little Black Book, which has Kevin Spacey, who's fraternized with minors, Bill Clinton, who committed adultery and has been accused of rape by multiple women outside of the Epstein case, Woody Allen, who, he likes to adopt people and rape them. Then you have Larry Summers, Prince Andrew, who's been accused of rape, and his foot fetish came out in the testimony. Steven Pinker, also Klaus is in there. There's some more celebrities and stuff, but we'll see. I'm putting these in here because they've all been involved in other cases of rape. Woody Allen's is unique. Adultery, a closet homosexual who's hitting on minors and using his Hollywood prowess there. And that, that would go back across the map over to Harvey Weinstein in Hollywood here too. So this is just a preliminary map, and a lot is going to hit the fan later when he hits trial, and we're going to get a lot more names. A lot of people are going to fall, a lot of pictures, a lot of evidence going to come out. What was in the safe in the Caribbean? We know it was in New York. What did they find in Palm Beach? How about New Mexico or Paris? It's all unraveling. But you look at all this pink. Sexual harassment, sex trafficking, and pedophiles. Pedophile and sex trafficking. There could be two bubbles because that's two people involved in it. Convicted rapist. Seen on the island, getting massages. Seen at Epstein's New York residence. Rape in Hollywood. Sexual abuse of a 14-year-old girl plus adultery. Pedophile and rape. Too much list. Rape, pedophile. Of kids, rape accusations, rape island massage, defended several rapists, raped a 13-year-old girl, homosexual pedo who raped little boys, sexual blackmail, adultery, closet homosexual, at least it was with an adult. And then, of course, human trafficking, money laundering, rape, and then narcotics and all the rest of it with this and this. Prostitutes and hookers on a cruise. And then a murder, and then another rape. This is disgusting. And then you come over here, and you've got adultery, rape, hitting on minors, sexual harassment, and accusations of rape. There aren't that many names on here because some of these, like these, are companies, right? There's a lot of rape going around, and of kids, and it's everywhere. I think this is so disgusting. And I want to thank everybody for sending donations for this map. I'll have a copy of the map in detail on ANC Report as well as my Patreon, and you'll be able to zoom in, I hope, and you can print it, put it on your wall, add some names, do what you like with it. Bolton must go. Peace. Now, why are there so many Jews involved with child rape, prostitution, human trafficking, etc.? Look at them, all the way from Hollywood to billionaire businessmen. It's all the same clique. Now, unless you think Jews are just prone to child rape, which I don't, the better explanation for this is the reason it's a specific ethnicity is because this is the one through identity that feels loyalty to the Israeli state. And this is an intelligence operation, and it is organized by the state of Israel so that they can gather blackmail and leverage on important politicians and business figures through the process of sexual blackmail, child predators, closet homosexuals, etc. This is organized for a state. This is not the product of some biological teleology of Jewish people, okay? This is because of Israel. That is the only logical conclusion. The reason so many of these people all happen to be Jewish involved in these rape rings is because that is what the state is utilizing to gain leverage over others in other states. This will lead back to Israel. Epstein was already referred to as an intelligence asset. I don't think it's for America, because look at everybody around him, including the Prime Minister of Israel, including spies for Israel, multiple spies. He is part of their espionage and blackmailing ring.
Be sure to smash that like button, share, and subscribe. And you can get a whole lot more content by following us on Patreon.